The morning I almost lost my son. I was standing in my kitchen reheating yesterday's coffee and arguing with myself about whether to call him. I'd been doing that a lot lately, picking up the phone, putting it back down. My son Ethan and I had always been close, the kind of close that doesn't need daily check-ins to stay warm. But something had been sitting wrong in my chest for weeks, a feeling I couldn't name. The kind that wakes you at 2 in the morning, for no reason you can point to. I set my mug down and dialed. It rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice answered, not my daughter-in-law's voice, but someone I didn't recognize. She said she was a nurse at Riverside General in Columbus, and that my number was listed as emergency contact for a patient named Ethan Calloway. I don't remember sitting down, but I must have, because my husband found me at the kitchen table, 20 minutes later, still holding the phone, my coffee cold beside me. Ethan had collapsed in the middle of his 3rd period class. 31 ninth graders watched their science teacher grab the whiteboard, miss it, and go down. One of his students, a 14-year-old girl named Priya, had the presence of mind to call 911 while another ran for the principal's office. The paramedics reached him in under 7 minutes. If they'd been 8, the doctor told me later, we would have been having a very different conversation. I was in the car within the hour. My husband Gerald wanted to come. I told him to stay home, and I said it in the voice that means I'm not discussing this. He kissed my forehead and stood in the driveway until I turned the corner. The drive from Dayton to Columbus is about an hour and 15 minutes on a good day. I made it in 58. I didn't notice until I was pulling into the hospital parking lot that I was still wearing my house slippers. The nurse who met me at the cardiac unit desk had kind eyes and the practiced calm of someone who delivers hard news for a living. She told me Ethan had suffered a serious cardiac event, a blockage in a major artery, caught in time, but serious enough that he was sedated and would remain so for the next several hours while they stabilized him. He was alive. He was being taken care of. He was going to need surgery in the morning. She walked me to the waiting area outside his room. It was empty. I stood there for a moment, looking at the row of chairs against the wall, the small table with its dog-eared magazines, the window with its view of a gray parking structure. Completely empty, not a coat draped over a chair. Not a paper cup from the vending machine, not a single sign that anyone had been there and left. Just empty, the way a room is empty when nobody has come at all. Is there? I started. Has anyone else been here? For my son? The nurse checked something on her clipboard. She told me that as far as she knew, no one had come in since Ethan was admitted 3 hours earlier. She said they'd tried the emergency contact number first, but got no answer. So they'd gone to the secondary contact, me, the secondary contact. I sat down in one of those chairs, and for a long moment I just breathed. Ethan had been married to Vanessa for 6 years. They had 2 children, Sophie, who was 8 and obsessed with horses, and had my mother's stubborn streak, and Jake, who was 5 and still small enough to fall asleep in my lap during long car rides. Ethan taught high school science and coached the junior varsity swim team for extra money, because teaching in Ohio doesn't pay what people think it pays. And Vanessa had gone back to school 2 years ago for her real estate license and hadn't had a steady income since. They were not struggling, exactly, but they were careful. They had a budget. They talked about it. I knew all of this because Ethan told me things. That was the kind of relationship we had. What I did not know, not yet, was where his wife was. I texted her from the waiting room. Ethan is in the hospital. Columbus, please call me. Nothing. I called. Voicemail. I sat with my phone in my hands and thought about that empty waiting room. After about an hour, a doctor came out and explained the procedure they'd performed and what the morning surgery would involve and the recovery timeline. He spoke to me as though I were the person in charge, which I suppose I was, since I was the only person there. I signed the paperwork they needed signed. I asked the right questions. I wrote things down in the Notes app on my phone because I knew I would need to explain all of this to Ethan when he woke up, and I wanted to get it right. Then I went to find a cup of coffee that wasn't terrible, which took longer than the drive from Dayton. I was standing at the window at the end of the corridor, watching the sky go from gray to dark When my phone finally rang, it wasn't Vanessa. It was a number I didn't recognize, with a Columbus area code. I answered, "Mrs. Calloway?" A woman's voice, slightly breathless, like she'd been debating whether to call. "I live next door to Ethan and Vanessa." I knew the name. Ethan had mentioned her, the neighbor who kept a spare key for emergencies. "Donna," I said carefully, "is everything all right?" There was a pause. "I have the kids here. Sophie and Jake. They've been with me since this morning. Vanessa dropped them off around 7 and said she'd be back by noon, and well, it's almost 8 o'clock now. And I've called her 6 times, and I didn't know what else to do." I set my paper cup down on the windowsill. "Are they all right?" I asked. "They're fine. They're fed. Jake fell asleep on my couch about an hour ago. Sophie keeps asking when her dad is coming home." She paused again. "Is something wrong? With Ethan?" I told her, as briefly as I could, what had happened. I heard her sharp intake of breath. I asked her if she could keep the children one more night, and told her I would arrange to collect them myself as soon as Ethan was stable enough to leave for a few hours. She said, of course, as many nights as necessary. She sounded shaken and a little angry, in the careful way of someone who doesn't want to say more than they know. I thanked her and ended the call. The children had been at the neighbor's house since 7 in the morning. 13 hours. Dropped off before their father even left for work. Dropped off before whatever Vanessa had planned for the day had even started. I walked back to the waiting room and sat back down in my chair. My phone showed no response to my text. No missed calls. No message of any kind from the woman who was supposed to be this man's partner, the mother of his children, the person whose name was listed before mine on every emergency contact form. I opened my banking app out of habit, something to do with my hands, and that's when I noticed a notification I'd nearly scrolled past. 3 months ago, Ethan had quietly added me as a secondary contact on their joint account. He'd done it after a conversation we had one Sunday when he'd mentioned, almost in passing, that Vanessa had been a little unpredictable with money lately. I hadn't pushed. I should have pushed. I'd added the app and told myself it was just a precaution. I opened it now. The joint checking account that I knew held their mortgage buffer, the account Ethan kept at a steady $4,000 for emergencies, showed a balance of $212. I sat very still. I went back further. The past 3 weeks showed a pattern that took me a moment to understand. Transfers. Dining. A hotel in Miami. Another hotel. Different name. Same city. A car service. A spa with a name I'd never heard of. A restaurant where a single dinner had cost more than Sophie's weekly writing lesson. An ATM withdrawals cash. Clean, untraceable. Almost $9,000. In 22 days, Ethan made $54,000 a year before taxes. I know because he told me once, not complaining, just explaining why they needed to be careful. $9,000 was 2 months of their mortgage. I put my phone face down on the chair beside me and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. Here is the thing about being a mother past 60. You have learned, over decades, how to be angry without making noise. You learn it when your children are small and something happens at school that makes your blood run cold, but you have to stay calm so they stay calm. You learn it at parent-teacher conferences when someone implies your child is the problem. You learn it in hospital waiting rooms when a doctor is taking too long and you have to sit with your hands folded while everything inside you is screaming. I am very good at being angry without making noise. I picked up my phone. I called the bank. I explained that I was a secondary account contact and that I had reason to believe the account had been compromised. The representative was patient and thorough. Within 40 minutes, the account was flagged, and the attached debit card was suspended pending review. Then I called Gerald. He answered on the first ring, which meant he hadn't slept. I told him everything in the order it had happened. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have loved about that man for 37 years. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What do you need me to do?" he said. "Call David Hartwell," I said. David Hartwell was a family attorney we'd worked with years ago when Gerald's mother passed. He was thorough and not easily rattled, and he returned calls the same day. Not tonight. First thing tomorrow. I need to know what our options are. Done, Gerald said. Are you eating? I looked at my untouched paper cup. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. I'll find something, I said. I love you. Call me when he's out of surgery, Gerald said. I don't care what time it is. I sat back in that waiting room chair, and somewhere around 11 o'clock that night, I finally let myself feel it, the fear I'd been keeping in a box since the moment the nurse's voice came through my phone that morning. My son, alone in a room down the hall, wires and monitors keeping watch over him in the dark. My grandchildren asleep on a neighbor's couch. The account that was supposed to catch them if they fell, gutted. I let myself feel it, and then I put it back in the box, because there was still a lot to do. When Vanessa finally called, it was almost midnight. She sounded annoyed more than alarmed, which told me she'd already tried the debit card. Margaret. She said she always called me Margaret, never Mom, which I had once thought was simply her way. What is going on with the account? My card was declined. I kept my voice very even. Ethan had a cardiac event this morning, I said. He's been in the hospital since 10 a.m. He's having surgery in a few hours. I've been here since early afternoon. Silence. Is he? He's alive, I said. His doctor is cautiously optimistic about the surgery. The children are at Donna Przybilski's house. They've been there since 7 this morning. More silence. Then, I didn't get the call. Your number was the primary emergency contact, I said. They called it repeatedly. I was the secondary contact. That's why I'm here. She started to say something about being out of range, about a work event, about her phone having trouble. I listened to all of it without interrupting. I had learned a long time ago that when someone is explaining themselves unprompted, the most useful thing you can do is stay quiet. I'll drive back tonight, she said finally. That isn't necessary, I said. The surgery is early. There's nothing to do tonight. I'll call you when he's out. But the account, I'll call you when he's out of surgery, I said again, very calmly, and ended the call. She called back 3 more times in the next hour. I let it go to voicemail each time. The surgery the next morning took 4.5 hours. I sat in that same waiting room, drinking bad coffee, and reading a 3-month-old copy of a magazine I had no interest in, understanding nothing on any of the pages. A hospital chaplain stopped and asked if I'd like company. I told him I was fine and that I appreciated the offer. He sat down anyway, and we talked about the Ohio State game for 20 minutes, which was exactly what I needed. When the surgeon came out, he was still in scrubs and he was smiling, which I later learned is the thing you look for. He said the procedure had gone well. He said Ethan would be in recovery for several hours and then moved to a step-down unit. He said with proper cardiac rehabilitation and lifestyle adjustments, there was no reason my son couldn't live a full, healthy life. I thanked him. I waited until he'd turned the corner before I put my face in my hands and sat like that for a while. Gerald arrived at noon with a container of soup from the deli I like and a clean change of clothes in a bag because he knows me. And he sat beside me and didn't say much, just kept his hand over mine, which was enough. I picked up the children that evening. Sophie ran to me across Donna's front yard and held on around my waist the way she used to when she was smaller. Jake was still half asleep and let me carry him to the car without argument, his head on my shoulder, his small fist curled in my collar. Donna walked me to the car and, just before I got in, she touched my arm. I need to tell you something, she said quietly, glancing at the children in the back seat. My husband and I, a few weeks ago, we saw Vanessa leave the house early one morning, with a man. Not Ethan. She paused. A younger man. They put luggage in his car. I didn't know if I should. I wasn't sure it was my business. I looked at her for a moment. Thank you for telling me, I said, and thank you for being here for those children. She nodded, and her eyes said what her mouth didn't. I drove back to the hospital with Sophie asleep against the window, and Jake still clutching my shoulder in his sleep, and I thought about what David Hartwell had told Gerald that morning. He'd said that before Ethan could make any decisions about his marriage, there were certain protections we needed to consider. He'd mentioned the joint accounts, which we'd already addressed. He'd mentioned the house, and then he'd said something that made Gerald go very quiet on the phone. He'd said that in cases like this, it was worth reviewing all insurance policies, specifically the beneficiary designations. He'd seen situations, he said, where policy beneficiaries had been changed without the other spouse's knowledge. It was more common than people realized. It was legal, often, but worth knowing. Gerald had pulled up a copy of Ethan's life insurance documents from the files we kept for him. Ethan had given us access years ago, one of those things you do quietly in case of emergency. The original policy, taken out 4 years ago, listed Vanessa and the children as joint beneficiaries. The updated version, filed 11 weeks ago, listed only Vanessa. Sophie and Jake had been removed. I have been alive long enough to understand that there are different kinds of cold. The cold of a February morning is one kind. The cold I felt reading that document that Gerald read to me over the phone was something else entirely. It settled somewhere behind my sternum and stayed there. David Hartwell was very calm about it. He said this was information Ethan would need to have when he was well enough to act on it. He said there were steps that could be taken. He said the most important thing right now was ensuring Ethan's financial stability during his recovery. That meant understanding exactly what had left that account and documenting it clearly. He asked if I'd kept the bank records. I had. I had screenshotted every transaction. He said that was good. He said I'd done exactly the right things. I don't tell you this because I want you to think I was calm. I was not calm. I went to the hospital bathroom and I stood at the sink and I ran cold water over my wrists the way you do when you need to bring yourself back from somewhere. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, quietly, not now. There will be time for all of it. Not now. When I walked back into Ethan's room, he was awake. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him look. He was pale in the way people are when their body has been through something enormous. And there were more wires than I would have liked. And he had my father's nose, which still surprises me sometimes even after 34 years. He saw me and his eyes got wet. Mom, he said. His voice was rough from the breathing tube. You're here. Where else would I be? I said. I pulled the chair close to the bed and I sat down and I took his hand. And for a while that was all that needed to happen. He asked about the children first, before anything else. I told him they were with Gerald. That Sophie had already informed Gerald's phone that horses were actually the most intelligent animals on Earth. That Jake had eaten an entire grilled cheese and was working on a second. He smiled at that, and then winced, because smiling took more than he had. He asked about work. I told him his principal had called, and that his class was covered, and that Priya, the student who'd called 911, had reportedly received a spontaneous standing ovation from her classmates, which Ethan should know. He closed his eyes for a moment. I'll write her a letter, he said. Then he asked about Vanessa. I had thought a great deal about this moment. I had thought about it in the waiting room and in the car and in the bathroom with the cold water running. I had decided something. Ethan deserved the truth. Not a softened version of it. Not information parceled out in careful doses to protect his feelings while he was vulnerable. He was a grown man who had almost died, and he was going to have to make decisions when he was well enough to make them, and he needed to make those decisions with full knowledge of what was real. But he was also, right now, hours out of cardiac surgery, with monitors beeping above his head. So I made a choice about order. I told him the children were safe and loved. I told him the most immediate financial concerns had been addressed, and he didn't need to worry about the mortgage this month. I told him there were things we needed to discuss when he was stronger, important things, and that I was not going anywhere, and that Gerald and I were going to be here through all of it. He looked at me with his father's eyes and he said, "How bad is it?" "It's manageable," I said, "because we caught it, and because you are not alone." He nodded slowly. He didn't push, which told me he'd already had some suspicions of his own. Sometimes the hardest part of knowing someone you love is recognizing when they've been carrying something they haven't found the words for yet. Vanessa arrived late that afternoon. I was in the hallway getting coffee when she came off the elevator. She looked polished in the practiced way of someone who has prepared themselves for being looked at. She was 31 years old, and she'd always been pretty in a careful way, the kind that requires a lot of work to look effortless. She stopped when she saw me. We stood in that hospital corridor for a moment, just the two of us, the hum of fluorescent lights above us. "How is he?" she said. "Better than he could be," I said. "Worse than he should be, given that he's 34. She started to say something about traffic, about the drive, about how terrible she felt. I watched her say it. I let her say all of it. Then I said, very quietly, "The children had been at Donna's for 13 hours when I called her last night. They had no idea where you were. Sophie kept asking when her dad was coming home. Vanessa went still. Ethan's debit card is suspended pending a bank review." I said, "I initiated that last night. The records from the past 3 weeks have been documented and are with a family attorney." I paused. "And Ethan's life insurance beneficiary designation has also been documented." The color left her face in a way I found informative. "I want you to understand something," I said. I kept my voice very calm. The way you keep your voice calm when you are saying something that will not be taken back. "Whatever happens between you and my son, that is between you and my son. He is going to recover, and when he is well enough, he is going to make his own choices. And I will support him in whatever those are. But I need you to know that I know what I know. And those children, I let that land. Those children have a grandmother who is paying very close attention." She opened her mouth and closed it again. "He's awake," I said. "Room 412. Take all the time you need." I took my coffee to the window at the end of the hall. Outside, the parking lot was full of ordinary cars, going ordinary places, people going home to their lives. I watched them for a while. I thought about what my own mother had told me once. After a particularly hard season in my marriage, when I'd called her from a payphone, this was before cell phones, and asked her what I was supposed to do when someone let you down in ways you couldn't forgive. She'd been quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You keep your hands busy and you tell the truth, and you let people show you who they are." That was it. The whole of it. I have thought about that a lot over the years. Ethan came home 10 days later, with a medication schedule taped to the refrigerator and a cardiac rehab appointment set for the following week. Gerald and I had been staying in the guest room, and Sophie had taken to following Gerald around the yard with a level of devotion usually reserved for dogs, which suited him just fine. We didn't push Ethan to talk. We cooked. We took the children to school and picked them up. We did the ordinary architecture of a household that lets a person breathe. He came to find me one evening on the back porch. The kids were asleep and Gerald had gone to bed early, and it was just the two of us with the sound of the neighborhood at night. He sat down beside me. He had a glass of water and I had the remains of a cup of tea, and for a while we didn't say anything. "I knew something was wrong," he said finally. "I think I'd known for a while. But it's easier not to know things, sometimes. Especially when there are kids." "I understand that," I said. "She's been staying with her mother," he said. "We've been talking to lawyers." I nodded. "I'm not angry," he said, which I didn't entirely believe, but which I understood to mean he wasn't only angry, and that he was working on the rest. I keep thinking about Priya. A 14-year-old had more presence of mind in a crisis than... He stopped. "Never mind. You don't have to sort it all out tonight," I said. "I know." He turned the glass in his hands. "I changed the insurance designation. David walked me through it. The kids are primary now, and you're the trustee until they're 25. He glanced at me. "I hope that's okay." "More than okay," I said. He leaned his head back. Above us, the Ohio sky was doing something beautiful with the clouds. The kind of thing you only notice when you've slowed down enough to look. "Do you think I'll be a good enough dad?" he asked. "On my own? I don't know how to do it all." I looked at my son, this person I had known before he had words for things. This person who had collapsed in front of 31 teenagers and had a 14-year-old save his life and had thanked her by saying he'd write her a letter. You ask me that, I said, as if you haven't already been doing it. He was quiet. A good parent, I said, is someone who shows up. That's the whole secret. You show up when it's hard, and you show up when it's inconvenient, and you show up when you don't know what to do next. You have been doing that since the day Sophie was born. Whatever else has happened, that part was always you. He didn't say anything, but after a while he reached over and put his hand over mine. His hands are like his father's hands, broad and warm, and they have been putting things back together all his life. We sat like that until it got cold. And then we went inside, and I made sure the locks were set and the lights were off and both children were sound asleep, and I stood in the door of Jake's room for a moment, listening to him breathe. There is a specific kind of gratitude that doesn't have a name, the kind that lives in your chest like a pressure you can't release, that visits you most often at night. That is really just another word for how much you love people you cannot protect completely. I have felt it about Gerald. I felt it about Ethan when he was small. I feel it now about Sophie and Jake. You can't shield people from everything. But you can pay attention. You can show up at the hospital in your house slippers at a moment's notice. You can sit in waiting room chairs for as long as it takes. You can learn to be angry without making noise. And you can know when silence is finished and it's time to speak. You can keep your hands busy. You can tell the truth. You can let people show you who they are, and when they do, you can believe them. And you can always be the person your children call second, knowing you will come like you were called first.